And you
Okay.
say, okay, recording in progress. Yay. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to She First Podcast. Today's guest is Marnie. Hi, Marnie.
Hi. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for being a guest. It took us a minute to get on.
Yeah, never a dull moment in the technology world.
So I wanted to start off by saying that I really, really love what you're doing to help children who have been abused like yourself, like becoming an advocate for the homeless youth and stuff, because they need the help. They really need it.
Yeah.
So I wanted you to tell my listeners a little bit about your story, about your background, what you went through and how you survived.
So my background is I was born to a mother who is a sociopath and a narcissist. And because that's the kind of mother that I had, she started abusing me before I even have conscious memories of being abused. One of the earliest is of her dropping me out of a 2-story window and breaking my arms when I was 5 years old. The physical abuse aside, as if that isn't big enough, the emotional abuse was actually the more devastating part of it. Like the emotional violence that I grew up with because of her was just something that became so intolerable that my habit became running away from home. So by the time I was 13, I became very, very good at running away from home. And at that point, I ended up staying gone. I ended up living on park benches in abandoned buildings, and I pretty much grew up on the streets. So that's my story of the beginning. And on the flip side of that, now I share my story because I don't want other children to go through what I did. And I want people to know that they're not alone who have experienced what I went through.
Wow. I don't think I would have survived down on the street. I'm a big wimp. So I don't think I would have survived. Like, I would have died because, yeah, I commend me for that because I couldn't do it at all.
We don't think we can until we're there. So, if you had told me I could have survived that, I wouldn't have imagined it. It's just sometimes you put one foot in front of the other, and that's what it takes.
Yeah, that's true. Well, I was homeless at 17, but I went to Job Corps, so I went to Job Corps for a while, so that kept me off the streets. But yeah, I definitely understand. So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your book that you have posted in the back?
Yep, this is a part of my life story. So this actually covers the background, why I ended up running away, what happened to me on the streets, because that's a part that people don't really understand. They see people out there and they think that, that's where you want to be. That's where you chose to be. They think you got out there because of drugs. For kids, especially, 80% of the kids who are running from some sort of abuse. More than 65%, and I hate throwing stats out there, but these are the stats, come from homes like the home I came from, which is a home that was a little bit more affluent. Like there was money in the house. It was pretty on the outside. So nobody wants to believe that bad things are happening because on the outside, it looks really good. We're very mainstream, right? And then when we end up on the streets, for myself, I was lucky not to fall into drugs, but most of the kids out there, most of even the adults out there, they don't end up out there with a drug problem. They find it when they're on the streets because how are you going to survive? It's a pretty devastating place to be. So part of my book covers my experience and my time on the streets, how I survived. And then it ends with the part of what happened afterwards and pulling my life together and what I learned from it.
Wow. So has your mom ever tried to contact you or anything? Or
you like the laugh? No. So yes and no. So when I was 17, I had a baby and social services reported me back to my mother because I was a minor. Back then, that's what they did. I don't know what they do now. That was 38 years ago. And when my mother spoke the magic words to me, I love you, on the phone, I didn't even think twice about going back to her because we always want our parents' love, no matter what they did to us. Social services didn't ask me why I ran. They didn't care. They were just lucky and happy to close my file out. Like I wasn't a person, right? So we had a relationship up until the point that my eldest daughter was 6 years old. And I saw the cycle beginning with my mother and my daughter. She didn't physically hurt her, but she was doing the thing where she was pitting my daughter, who's a 6-year-old, against me, against her little brother, who was 3. Narcissists like to do that. They divide people and then they use them as tools. So when I saw that beginning to happen and that she was no different than the mother I had grown up with, I went no contact. And I've been no contact for over 3 decades. There were a couple of times she came around. I don't foresee, yeah, you never know, but I don't foresee her coming around at this point in time, especially when I am so vocal about my experiences with her.
Wow. So what did her family, like that side of the family, say about this? Like, did they defend you? Did they help you? They
No.
didn't do anything?
No, I mean, I had an aunt who knew some things were wrong. Everybody knew something was wrong, but who knew in a way that she was trying to get information from me when I was little. And I would kind of tell her that my mother was mean, not really elaborate. And then she would go to my mother to say that I needed counseling, that my mother needed counseling. And what my mother would do is turn that around on me. I mean, I was just a little girl, like 10, 11 years old. And she would say that my aunt told her that I was sick in the head and I needed help and that I better be careful or she's going to institutionalize me. So I shut right down from that point. And the other thing is when it's a system of narcissists, so in a family, there's never just one. It's usually a generational thing, or there's a few others maybe in the distance, but we call it a narcissistic family system for a reason. You have your main gaslighters, your main abusers, and then you have the people who are afraid to break free from that. So it becomes a brainwash, like a cult. And when somebody speaks up, they get ostracized and kicked off the island the same way you would in a cult because they don't want to change. They don't want anything to be different because nobody wants to be left holding the bag or taking ownership for allowing the abuse to continue. So that's what happens in most of the families. And I think it's really important to touch on that because people don't understand when they go no contact and they lose everybody, what's happened. And the reality is we never had everybody in the first place. If we did, the abuse wouldn't have happened.
That's true. That's true. And a lot of the family members don't know that being a narcissist is a mental illness. It is. It's a mental illness and they need help. Like a lot of them don't think
fixable. It's not fixable. So who needs the help is the victim. Because we know that narcissism is not curable. There are people who are narcissists who are getting services for it. And again, there are different levels of narcissism. My mother's a sociopath, like that's done and dusted. So she's both, right? You can't fix that. But with somebody who is in a different place on the spectrum of being a narcissist, in counseling, they can get help if they're going to stick with it. Unfortunately, what usually happens when a narcissist goes to counseling is they just learn how to fake being an empath. And that makes them a more dangerous narcissist.
Oh my God. I did not know that about people. Like I'm pretty sure I've come across those people. It's just that I try to see the good in people. So I'm just like, nah, they're good. They're not really bad. That's what I did.
They're toxic. I don't care if they're a narcissist. Like we the word around all we want. To me, you're either somebody who is respectful and kind and knows how to respect boundaries and all of those different things, a healthy person that you can build a relationship with or a friendship with, or you're not. So for me, it's I look at it in 2 ways. You're either healthy or you're toxic.
That's true. That's true. And you mentioned your siblings and your TikTok. How is it that your own siblings didn't see it and don't believe you? Like, I just don't get that.
Yeah. So my brother who grew up in the same household with me, that would have been my question. It was my question for a long time. I mean, and it was a question I asked him. Like I said to him, you grew up in the same house. You were there when these things happened. And he doesn't want to acknowledge any of that. Ultimately, because of the way that the narcissist will divide the children, there will be a child who's the better child than the other, or the golden child and the black sheep. He and I were actually going back and forth in those roles, but we didn't know it. We always thought the other was the golden child at all times. ultimately he needs my mother's love and acceptance. He needs the whole family system more than he needed to stand with his sister, even though he grew up and witnessed what happened. And that's just where it oftentimes falls. Like, we need
So
our
do you ever do you ever think that he was being abused by your mom as well? Like not just the mental abuse, but like physically being abused by her as well?
Physically, I only remember one time, like, where she was like hitting him on the back. In fact, it was the day that she dropped me out of the window. I remember her doing that. But other than that, physically, I never saw it. But outside of the day that she dropped me out of the window, I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure that he never saw the physical abuse she perpetrated against me, which wasn't her first thing to do. Normally, it was emotional. But because she wanted each of us to think the other one was the golden child, she also very often made sure that we didn't see what the other one was going through.
Oh wow. Wow. She sounded really bad. From
Yeah.
your TikTok, she sounded like the devil. Like the devil came up from hell and is her.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like that's terrible. I'm so sorry to say that about your mom.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I get
Mhm.
it. And the thing is, I mean, the thing with my TikTok is, I mean, like, I've got what, 110, 112,000 people together now on my platform. And so many of them do the same thing. They're like, is your mother's name? Do we have the same mother? So it just goes to show you how many of us were raised by these narcissists. And people talk about being married to one and in a relationship with one. Well, those people have children. So
Yeah.
if they're doing that to an adult, what are they doing to a child who's powerless? And that's the part of the story that I fill in.
Exactly. I agree with you 1,000%. Like people focus more on things that are irrelevant instead of the youth and the children. Like they
Yeah,
need help and they don't have a voice. They don't have anyone in their corner. When they do go to court, they have to see the person that abused them
yeah,
and speak about it, and then their abuser gets off. Like I just don't get it. I just don't get it how our
this what,
society works.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, because, we're a society that used to be like, children should be seen and not heard. And
Mhm.
so we're undoing years of that kind of rhetoric where
Mhm.
we're beginning to understand. I mean, we know this, but as a
Mhm.
society, we're beginning to understand that children actually need to be seen and heard first, that
Right.
they're the ones that need to be served first because they're the ones who can't protect themselves.
Exactly, exactly. I feel like when they do interview children who have been abused, they need to interview them alone,
Yeah.
away from their abuser, because their abuser might look at them and be like, you better not tell, you better not say
Oh,
anything.
absolutely. Absolutely. And even before a child goes in for interviews, and a lot of that has changed, but there's a lot of areas and places where they are being questioned in front of the parents. You have people who have a tremendous lack of training. There's a lot of things in the system where there's gaps. But even when a child does go in to be interviewed, the way the child is interviewed, the questions that are asked need to be tweaked more. They need to be more child focused. And people need to be aware that when the child goes in to be interviewed, if the parent knows about it or the abuser ahead of time, they're manipulating that child. There needs to
Exactly.
be more of a space created before that interview happens and during that interview process. And
Mhm.
those are those things that we're beginning again I mean, it's one of the things I do. I teach social workers. I do talks for first responders and people who are connecting to children, giving them different language skills, like letting them know that when you say, well, your mom or dad must love you or they want the best for you, immediately you've just shut the child down because you've aligned yourself with the abuser. It sounds like a small statement, but it has huge consequences in terms of getting a child to be able to trust you and open up.
That's true. That's true. They're on a different level. Like you have to speak to them a certain way.
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
yeah. Oh yeah. Like there was a cop that saved a boy that was being abused by his parents. He spoke to him. He was like, your parents want you to tell me the truth. And that's when he told him. And I was like, so he got it out of him by saying that. Like your parent wanted me to tell you, like want you to tell me.
Yeah,
And I
I'm
was
not
like,
a fan of that though. You've deceived this child who already has nobody to trust. Like the means don't always justify the ends. I mean, I commend him, at least he did get the information, but I would never teach somebody to do that, because I just feel like it could come back somewhere down the road. Like even in a courtroom, the child could say, well, the police officer told me, my parents wanted me to tell, and then the whole thing gets thrown out. So I think that's a really dangerous thing to do. Well,
wow.
we need to think about it, how it goes through from the police officer, who actually should be the one investigating the child abuse, not a social worker. A social worker is not an investigator. Once that's happened and it goes through the court system, there needs to be a better advocate, someone who's actually trained for more than a few hours, and somebody who really has a good hold on the court system so that they can properly advocate for the child. And while we have those people now, they don't have the level of training that they need, and it's doing everyone a disservice.
Yeah. Have you ever tried to like volunteer to talk to police officers about this specific topic? Like, have you ever went to? You
I
have?
get hired for that. I actually get hired for conferences that target law enforcement, and target social workers, social service organizations, homeless organizations, psychiatric hospitals. So I do go talk to these people. I get hired for that. If somebody asks me to volunteer, like they don't have a budget at all, yeah, for sure, I'll do a talk.
Mhm.
But that's a part of my profession. That is a part of what I do.
I love what you're doing. I love it. I love it. Like it makes me want to help more. Like I wanted to become a social worker, but I think I'm too old right now. Like, is it too late? I'm
I
like, is
don't
it
know
too
how old
late?
you are, but I don't think you're too old to do that.
Everybody
I
says
think
I'm like,
we're
I'm
ever
not
too old for reinvention or following our dreams. Let me just put that out there.
that That's true. So, can you tell us a little bit about your workshops and how you advocate for the homeless youth?
Yeah, so the workshops are a separate thing. The workshops that I do are targeted towards the survivors of narcissistic abuse, whether they're no contact with their family, low contact, somewhere in between, trying to work that through. And in that, we work through some of the things that are left behind, particularly because of that abuse. So things like boundary setting, building trust, not just with other people, but within ourselves first and foremost, repairing some of our self-image that was left behind, and letting go of the losses and grieving those losses, because people don't realize that when we go no contact with our family, like for me to go no contact with my mother, that wasn't a choice. It was a decision from the only choice I was left with. And when that happens and you lose a family as a result, and everybody's walking around doing their thing and they're all alive, the person who went no contact is left grieving people who are alive. And that's a really unique experience. So that's a part of what I cover in my workshops. With regard to advocating for homeless youth, that's a big part where I do volunteer. So I am on the committee for Covenant House here in Canada. We have 2 of them here in Canada. I do work with other Covenant houses. I'm one of their spokespeople. I'm a volunteer spokesperson. So I'll do news interviews and share my story and the good work that they're doing. And every year I sleep out on the streets for a night with a bunch of women. It's called the Women Unite Sleep Out. And we raise funds and even more awareness for Covenant House. So that's a big part of what I do. And then I have a nonprofit because I'm not doing enough. I have a nonprofit, and every year on Christmas Day, I put together new backpacks that are on wheels for easy transport, filled with a bunch of new essentials, things I wish I had had when I was on the streets, and some other goodies too. I have a street team. We go out together as volunteers, and on Christmas Day, we put them directly in the hands of people who are currently living on the streets. And I do that because I never sought a service. So when people were going to, maybe get a Christmas meal somewhere from off of the streets. I would have never done that. I would have missed out because I would have been too afraid to approach those services. So we really try to target people who are going to fall through the cracks that much more. And the volunteers that go out, they get an experience from that, connecting to people that they would never ordinarily talk to. And the result is then they volunteer, then they year round feed people, at least they'll engage in conversations instead of walking by. So it really has a great impact beyond that day.
Wow. So does your foundation and your organization, do they go to different parts of the world? Because I would like to do that here in Kentucky.
Well, I can help you do that wherever you are, and I'm happy to do that. So far, we've done it in Toronto, Canada, and we've done it in Montreal. I'm kind of hoping to do it in Miami next year. I was raised in the States. Miami is the place that I ran from. So I kind of feel like it would be a full circle kind of thing for me. So I'm toying with that and maybe taking it on the road. I would love to be able to expand it. It's an amazing, it sounds like it's only one day, but it's a day that really makes a big difference in a lot of lives.
I believe it. Because whenever I get off work, there's a group of homeless people, and I'm like, and
Yeah.
I always donate money I don't have, and I'm like, I need my $5, but here you go.
Yeah, I mean, I do that too. And sometimes, like, if I don't have anything, at least stopping and saying, hey, listen, I wish I could help you out. I don't have anything. You would be surprised how many times somebody will respond with, thanks for like acknowledging me, and you might even end up in a conversation, because the isolation that a person is experiencing on the streets with people walking by, not making eye contact, is actually more starvation than the lack of food.
Yeah, that's true. Like, I have a box of clothes, like they're box of clothes for men and women, but I'm so scared to get out of my car to go give it to them, because it's a group. Like, it's at least 20 homeless people there, and I'm like, nobody's helping them.
Yeah, you get somebody to go out with you. I mean, anything that can happen. And sometimes there's somebody who's living on the streets who is not mentally sound or safe. We do have to be aware of that. That isn't the bigger part of the population of people experiencing homelessness, but I've seen it, and I know that it happens. When we go out as a team, I do want everybody going out in at least twos and just being aware of their approach and being careful and respectful too, right? Because fear exists on both ends, but maybe getting somebody to go out with you, and just connecting, make some sandwiches, bring them out, bags of chips and pop, whatever.
Yeah, that sounds good. My last and final question. I wanted to talk about your TED Talk discussions.
Yes.
Oh, you want to talk about it?
Anything you want to know. You know me, I'm an open book. Here it is.
I'm definitely going to buy it. I'm definitely going to buy it. I want to go dig deeper into your story, because I write articles as well, and I feel like your story could help a lot of my listeners, because a lot of people message me and they're like, hey, your interviews with these people really help me come out, help me, and I'm like, wow.
What we do. Yeah.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit about your TED Talk discussions?
Well, there's only one so far, right? More in the works, I hope, in the extra hours of my day, because I'm also, just kind of as a side note, I practice as a EMDR therapist, and you can look up what EMDR means, because that's like a whole thing. But also I specialize as a therapist specifically in narcissistic abuse. And there's not a lot of us out there who are in the area working from childhood abuse the way that I do. My TED Talk is really talking about my experience on the streets, like what I shared here today, what led me to the streets, and sensitizing people to what happens when the kids are out there, the trafficking, the predatory behavior, the fact that we're targets so quickly into our time being on the streets, and what we can do to help intervene and help children not end up out there in the first place, because people knew that I was running. And instead of acting like a child who's running as just being a problem child, realizing that a child who is running from a problem household and getting down to the bottom of it so we can, provide services and intervention. This is a preventable problem. It really, really is. And if we knew more, we could do better. So that's what my TED Talk is about. It's to make sure people know more to do better.
I love it. I love it. I'm going to spread it everywhere.
Thank you.
Because there's a lot of kids, they will tell, people of authority. There's my dog. But they'll tell people. She's quiet for a little bit. Come here, Waddles. But they'll tell, like, I'm trying to get it out. We may have to end it because she's barking a lot.
It's a sign.
But thank you so much for being a guest, and I will be sure to share your TED Talk.
Thank you very much, Brooke. I really appreciate it.
Bye.
I'm gonna end the.
You're like a circle that floats around me, keeping me safe and sound. And when I fall, you tied around.